So at its core, it converts a temperature difference into mechanical energy. Gas is sealed in a closed system, which we will be referring to as the working fluid of the cycle.
And then heat is added to that closed system, so basically the gas is heated up, and then as that gas expands and contracts, it powers the piston, and that's where you get the work coming through. That's where you get the work from in the Stirling cycle. And so most of the work is transferred to mechanical work, and then it's used to spin a wheel, and then the momentum in that wheel is used to keep that cycle going.
And we have a little animation of a simple Stirling device. So as we can see, the heat source is causing the air to expand and contract, and compression and expansion, which is being turned into mechanical work, which is driving the wheel.
All right. So some terms you may not have heard before that are crucial to understanding our next steps of how the Stirling cycle really works. So the power piston basically is used to compress and decompress the gas, so it changes the volume. And this is essentially how the work is provided through the engine. And then the displacer is on the other side of that piston, and it's basically used to move the air from one side to the other. So the air gets really hot, and then the displacer moves it to the cold side, it cools down, and then that helps drive the piston.
So then the regenerator, which is also going to be used interchangeably with the term heat exchanger. It's the heat source that is internal to the engine, and it's where some of the heat is recaptured. So that's going to be denoted as like QR. So it's not Q in and it's not Q out because it stays within the system and is constantly being reused. And this is why when we take away the heat source from the device, it's still able to like run independently for a little while.
And ideally in the cycle there, you have, so like the heat exchanger loses a little bit of heat, and that's where your loss comes from. But it actually does a pretty good job of retaining it. That's why it's more efficient than the other engines. All right, so modeling the Stirling cycle. So on the left here, you have your simple Stirling cycle model. It starting in step 1, you have from process 1 to 2, you have isothermal compression. So basically, it's at a constant temperature, and it takes a little bit of momentum from so as the cycle is going, the wheel has momentum, and that's used to compress in that first step. But to get it started, and you'll see when we demonstrate, you kind of just have to give it a little push to get it going. So from 1 to 2, it's compressed, so the volume decreases, the pressure increases. And then from 2 to 3, it's heated inside that gas, and that's that Q in is used to heat it. So the volume stays the same, but the pressure keeps building and building. And then from 3 to 4, you have isothermal expansion. So it's the volume's allowed to increase, the pressure is going to decrease, but again, the temperature is going to stay the same. And then from 4 to 1, you have Q out. So you have the air is now on the cool side, it's cooling down. And Julie, do you have anything to add to that?
So just to be clear, so this is when we're actually lighting it first. So this is the external Q in and the external Q out. And then this is like within the system. So this is going to be our QR. So when it's this Q out is going to go to the regenerator or the heat exchanger. And then this heat is coming in, like we said, by the regenerator or heat exchanger again.
All right, so the first process in the Stirling engine cycle is constant temperature compression, so that isothermal compression. So basically I know I kind of touched on it in the first slide there, but gas is compressed as work in, usually from the wheel. It's usually momentum. It compresses that piston, which so the volume is going to decrease, the pressure increases, and then the displacer, it's going to move the displacer, so the gas is going to move from what was the cold side to now the hot side, where in the next phase it'll be heated up. So process 2 to 3 is just the constant volume heat addition. So it's held in place by that. It's basically just heated up, and as it's heated up, the pressure is increasing, but the volume stays the same. So then it's building and building, so that eventually it's going to expand. So
this is the isothermal expansion. So the temperature is remaining constant through the external Q-in, which is going to be from our external heat source, which is we're going to see like a little flame that we have. So at state 3, the working fluid has reached a maximum pressure, a maximum temperature, and a minimum volume. So this is probably the most important process, just because this is where we're going to see the overall positive work out of the cycle, which is going to be our mechanical work. And this is because the work out of the cycle is much larger than the work in, which is what we use to initially compress it. And then what we can see the device doing during this process is the piston will begin to move towards the outer rim of the cylinder as it expands. And then we're going to go to the next process. So this is our isovolumetric heat rejection. So this is the piston's going to be fixed, so there's no change in volume. But during this process, the heat within the working fluid is rejected and is moved to the regenerator, and that's going to be our QR because it doesn't leave the system entirely. So temperature of the working fluid will decrease to T3, and then what we're going to see the device actually do is, so like I said, the piston is fixed. The displacer is what we call a regenerator matrix because it's what's taking the heat out, and it moves so that it's forcing this high temperature working fluid to pass through it, and it's going to exit at a lower temperature.
All right, so some applications of the Stirling cycle. So in the 70s, it generated some interest as what's called a micro combined heat and power unit. So basically they, in Europe, they were talking about providing, or as having for purchase, either companies or homes, basically these small, like home-sized Stirling engines that ran off of diesel. They said it would take about like a half a liter of diesel a day, and you could power your whole house and heat your house because the Stirling engine, it would provide electricity, but then also the excess heat it would give off was then could be used to heat your home. So this company called Whispergen developed some small home use ones, and they were actually able to, the average household was able to produce enough electricity to actually sell back to the grid and make some of their money back. And then another really cool use of that I was reading for Stirling engines was this company MSI based out of Korea. They were developing Stirling engine powered fans for their microprocessor units. So the microprocessor, like the chips, as they would run, they get hot, and then that heat, that temperature differential could be used to then power a Stirling engine. And then that Stirling engine would run a little fan, which would then cool down the chips, and then that process could keep going. So you essentially would have, it was an efficient way of cooling down the chips because you didn't have to use any extra electricity or heat. You were just using your excess heat that was going to be wasted anyway. And then, so then using that same idea, I was reading some ideas that you could use that excess heat that a lot of power plants today, like those smokestacks that come out of it, that's just water vapor that's hot, but you can use that temperature differential to then power a Stirling engine. So for a nuclear power plant, it produces a lot of waste heat. So you can then use that waste heat to power a Stirling engine, which then you could be used for various applications. Like I saw one where they could be used to desalinate water, and it seemed like a pretty good idea. And then again, they looked into a while ago using them as engines for automobiles, but the weight, just how heavy the engines had to be to how much power they were providing just didn't make it realistic. But there's a few applications, and I know Germany, they developed a few test models for submarines because the weight didn't make as much of a difference because you're in the water. So they were able to have a Stirling cycle on board, which then was more efficient and you could use less fuel. And another cool idea they were using for Stirling engines was they had them in solar power plants. So the initial solar power plant, usually you'd heat up a bunch of water, it would go run a turbine. But they were saying you could use that same process where you set up a bunch of mirrors, focus it on a bunch of Stirling engines, and then that temperature differential again would be then used to power the Stirling engine. So you had a renewable source of energy that could just keep going, and it was pretty efficient. Basic, this is the sealed gas right here. We've been messing around with it, so we've kind of burned it a little bit, but the sealed gas, she has lit it. So this, so basically this heat source is going to heat up this gas, and then it's going to expand. So right now, if you don't touch it, it's not going to do anything because it needs that little bit of mechanical work to get it going. She's just going to hold the lighter there to keep it going. more. So then you see in there, you'll see it once it starts going, the piston is going to go back and forth, and it's the compression and expansion of that air is going to power that, going to provide that work that goes in the engine. So the heat exchanger is that middle part right there, and so the gas is gonna flow back and through. So as it gets going, it's gonna start getting pretty fast here. So it's just constantly going through that cycle.
And as we can see here, it's starting to light up. So the mechanical work is causing our little light to be a bunch of little pretty colors. But as we can see, once it starts going, once we move away the heat source.
So now it's not lit at all.
We can see that it's still going because heat has been conserved in the regenerator, and obviously that we're still having mechanical work being produced. And it actually will go on for a pretty impressive amount of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, we see the displacer moving as the air is compressing and expanding. And yeah.
I think that concludes our presentation. Thank you guys so much for watching.